Welcome back and thanks for being here for another one of my true crime videos. Today's case actually hits very close to home for me, quite literally, because it happened just a few hours from where I live, and it made a lot of local headlines back when the crime first occurred in December of 2020. Now, I do want to give you all a trigger warning because this case, again, involves children, specifically the murder of an innocent 4-year-old girl. True crime cases are always hard to digest, and when they involve children, it makes it just way harder. So I just want to put that all out on the table for you guys and let you know, even though this information isn't going to be graphic, it's still disturbing, it's hard to take in. This case involves shared religious delusions, twisted coercive affairs, communal child abuse and neglect, and unfortunately, like I said, the murder of an innocent 4-year-old girl. I'm talking about the Jessica Mast case, straight out of Benton County, Missouri. In this case, 4 adults participated in the abuse, neglect, and murder of Jessica Mast when she was just 4 years old, and 2 of those adults were her parents. The other 2 were her next door neighbors. There is a great deal of history between these 2 families. I'm talking religious history, sexual history, and their own personal histories that all definitely played a part in what happened here. So we're going to be covering all of that in this video, as well as the details of the crime. There's a lot going on in Missouri right now with the courts and with child protective services that is just falling short of the community's expectations, not just in this case, but in so many other cases, which has people in the local area worried about justice for Jessica. So I am going to cover all of that and get you guys up to speed on everything that's happening here in Missouri. We have some information about what happened, but no doubt we're going to learn a lot more about these key players and the details of the crime as this all plays out through trial and sentencing. So in this video, I'm just going to cover what we know so far, and you'll probably see an update video from me once we get further along in this case. Jessica Mast was 4 years old in November of 2020. She had 2 siblings, a younger brother who was 2 years old and a younger sister who was about 10 months old. They all lived with their parents, James and Mary Mast. James Mast was 28 and Mary Mast was 29. Jessica's family lived in a very remote part of Missouri. Within walking distance, they only had a couple of neighbors. Their house was surrounded by farmland, dirt roads, thick woods, and a small pond that was just a little ways from the back of their house. So Jessica's parents, James and Mary Mast, were a married couple who used to belong to a local Anabaptist fellowship. But it's been reported that they left that congregation, that fellowship, because they had some religious and spiritual differences. So I'm just going to give you guys a little bit of background on Anabaptists. Their values are centered around faith, family, and modesty. They go the extra mile, and they usually wear head coverings to cover their hair in church. The females do. They tend to embody very specific and traditional gender roles within the family. So women are, cooking, cleaning, tending to the children. Men are maybe doing more hard labor or bringing home the wages and stuff. So while some Anabaptists don't really consider their fellowship or their religion as a branch of Christianity, it is pretty similar to many forms of Christianity. They practice baptism. The main difference between Anabaptists and other forms of Christianity is that Anabaptists practice baptism later in life, whereas other forms of Christianity, like Catholics, they'll baptize infants. So Anabaptists feel like a person needs to have more developed consciousness and thought process and a relationship with God to make that decision for themselves, rather than, making that decision for an infant. So those are just some of the key characteristics of the Anabaptist faith. And a lot of Mennonites and Amish are actually kind of derived from the Anabaptist faith. Anabaptist history goes all the way back to the Radical Reformation period. So Anabaptists had a lot of influence, but the Mennonites branched off mostly because many Mennonites don't believe or accept charismatic manifestations, while Anabaptists do. And charismatic manifestations basically are, instances where people are taken on by the Holy Spirit and they might act a little strange. So they might start speaking in tongues, or they might fall under hypnosis or some sort of trance. Maybe they experience a miraculous healing. It's a charismatic manifestation of the Holy Spirit or of God's work happening, and they kind of consider it to be a miracle. But a lot of other branch offs of Anabaptists, including the Mennonites, think that this is kind of like heresy. They just don't really get on board with a lot of those charismatic manifestations or accept them as God's work, because sometimes, especially in the Anabaptist community, they'll accept even possession as a charismatic manifestation, whether it's possession by the Holy Spirit or by the devil. It gets kind of loose, and a lot of other religions and lifestyles that have branched off from this kind of just wanted no part in that. Also, many versions of Christianity have some type of organized religion, a church, some sort of set establishment with a pastor or a preacher, somebody who leads the church. But in Anabaptist fellowships, that's not the case. They call it a fellowship because there isn't one person in charge. There's no one preacher that you go to see every week and you listen to his sermon. Anabaptists practice what they call free course, and this means that they don't have to rely on one specific institution or one church building for their worship. They can worship wherever they are. And they also don't rely on just one leader. So there isn't one preacher, one pastor, one sort of head of that community church. They have a number of leaders, members of the community who are in high standing and who are kind of the most influential, mostly men. Jessica's father, James, was actually one of these spiritual leaders in his Anabaptist church before he left. And they trusted him to provide spiritual guidance and wisdom for other members of the community. He was supposed to support them. Some of his duties as one of the leaders of this fellowship involved providing one-on-one guidance and mentorship to people in his community. And a couple of years prior to 2020, he was entrusted to provide spiritual guidance and mentorship to a young woman named Courtney Almond. Courtney was about 19 years old when she first met James through their local Anabaptist fellowship in Benton County, Missouri. But Courtney was originally from Pennsylvania, and she had a tumultuous past and a long mental health history. She'd even spent a couple of years living in a mental health institute back in Pennsylvania. James agreed to provide spiritual guidance to Courtney Almond, but instead of helping her, he started sleeping with her. James was somebody who was trusted by his community to provide guidance and support to this young woman, and instead he exploited her and used her for his own personal gain. When people who are in a position of power engage in a sexual relationship with the people they have an advantage over, that's an abuse of power. I mean, it's unhealthy, and I think it's a red flag in any relationship, especially in the one that was happening between James Mast and Courtney Almond. He was supposed to be an established spiritual leader in his community, and he was supposed to be helping this young woman who was struggling. This young woman, Courtney Almond, who would soon reveal how disturbed she really was. So at one point, James had brought Courtney to live with him and his family. So it was him and his wife, Mary, living with their 2 children, Jessica and her younger brother, and then Courtney moved in. And during this time that they were all living together, James was sleeping with both Mary and Courtney. And Mary got pregnant during this time. Now, it's been reported through various sources that Mary wasn't exactly happy with this arrangement. She didn't want Courtney to be living with them, and she was a little bit jealous about it. But she went along with this because in a lot of religions, and I guess in the dynamic of their household, it's considered virtuous to be obedient and to be submissive to your husband. So she was going along with it because it's what James said, basically. And this is a pattern that Mary displays in her life. I guess if she's not happy with something or she doesn't like something, she just goes along with it anyway because she's told to. And I don't know if that's her having low self-esteem or not being able to really like think for herself, never really asking herself what she wants, or just not being intelligent enough to know what she wants or to be able to speak up against what's right or wrong. I don't know what exactly it is, but she just goes along with stuff whether she likes it or not, just because someone tells her to do it. And we'll find out too that it's not even that she goes along with stuff because her husband tells her to do so. She does stuff apparently because other people tell her to do so, and it's definitely a pattern, and it's an ugly one. So as Mary progressed through her pregnancy, James and Courtney were spending a lot more alone time together. And at one point they even disappeared to some secluded cabin. I mean, they were already kind of in a secluded cabin, but they went to someplace alone and just disappeared off the grid for a couple of weeks together. And during this time, when her husband, James Mast, is off the radar and she can't get a hold of him because he's somewhere eloped with Courtney Almond, Mary Mast gives birth. She has her third child and her husband isn't even there because he's with his mistress. So this was the last straw for her, I guess. And once they came back, she put her foot down and was like, I don't want Courtney living with us anymore. So that was the end of it. And James Mast kicked Courtney out. After getting kicked out of James and Mary's house, Courtney was gonna have to find a new place to stay. But she didn't have to look very far or for very long before she found herself living with a new family. This family was the next door neighbors of James and Mary, and they also used to be a part of the same Anabaptist fellowship. Both of these next door neighbors share the same last name, but they're not related. So James and Mary Mast lived across the way from Ethan Mast and his family. Ethan was married, and yet he still took Courtney in to come live with them, and as soon as she started living with them, she started sleeping with Ethan. So now we see that Courtney has this pattern in her life of, sleeping with these men that have taken her in, and I don't know if it's because she was really attracted to them and she just, I guess, really liked both of these married men, or if she felt like she sort of was indebted to them, or if they like coerced her into it, I don't know. But she slept with both of these married men that she ended up staying with. People make choices like that every day. Lots of people have affairs, lots of young women sleep with married men. So that's really not, I guess, the main problem that I have with this story. I think it's a little odd, and I definitely think it reveals something about her. I think the affairs were definitely important though, because they reveal a little bit about Courtney's methodology and the way her mind worked and how she got what she wanted. She, by having an affair with both of these married men and then having their families sort of condone it, whether they wanted it to happen or not, they let it happen. That allowed Courtney to sort of like wedge herself into these families, start having a say and a little bit of like control over the dynamic. And I think that was essential for the buildup in this case. Whether or not she really had feelings, like genuine feelings for James Mast, or if it was a relationship built off of exploitation, she left that relationship with some pretty harsh feelings towards James and his family, especially Mary. And I can't help but think that this was because Mary was the reason why she got kicked out. She'd been sleeping with this married man, James, and I think, she expected that he was gonna keep putting her over the needs of his wife and children. And when he kicked her out, that was a diss to her, and she blamed Mary for it, and she built up a lot of animosity and resentment towards that entire family, and she was not shy about sharing those feelings with Ethan and his family and pretty much anyone who would listen. She had said stuff about wanting to put a bullet through James's head, and she expressed a lot of like just violence and anger towards them. And she also expressed that same feeling towards Mary, his wife. And she eventually came to the conclusion that Mary was being possessed by a demon. And she told Ethan that she knew this because God was speaking through her. God was telling her that she needed to intervene and basically step in and take over that family so that Mary and James's children wouldn't also end up possessed, because Mary's possessed by a demon and she'll corrupt the kids yada, yada, yada. And remember, in the Anabaptist communities in the background, even if they're not a part of like a fellowship currently, they still embody and carry with them a lot of those same beliefs. And they believe in charismatic manifestations, so possessions or speaking in tongues, healing, hypnosis, stuff like that. And so I think that, you know, this was sort of one way for Courtney to express how angry she was. She wanted something to be wrong with that family. She wanted a reason, a good reason to hate them and to cause them harm. I think Courtney just hated Mary and James Mast, and she was using this whole, you know, demon thing as an excuse for wanting to hurt them and actually going through with hurting them and causing them pain. And she probably resented the children too, because James, you know, chose his family over her in the end. And yeah, James is still like a piece of shit, but she probably looked at it as like, oh, well, he chose his family over me. And whether that was conscious in her mind or not, I think that that's really the root of this, because she would have to be pretty crazy and have some really strong delusions to think that there is a devil in this whole family and that God is speaking to her. And you know what? She did spend a couple of years in a mental health ward, so maybe she is that crazy. I don't know. But it's hard enough to believe that one person, that Courtney, could believe this and, you know, go through with trying to beat the devil out of these kids. It's another thing to think that this guy, Ethan, is going along with it too, because he was involved with it. Maybe Ethan really thought that Courtney was a vessel for God in that moment and that she was really speaking for him and that the family was possessed. Apparently it was the will of God that Courtney and Ethan discipline this family so as to save them from demons. And the type of discipline they were supposed to be administering was very violent physical discipline. They were going to beat the family with wooden spoons and belts. Courtney and Ethan paid a visit to the Mast house and told James and Mary that Mary was possessed by a demon, that Courtney was a vessel of God, she was speaking for God, and that it was God's will for Courtney and Ethan to beat the Mast family and beat the children in order to vanquish the devil and to get those bad spirits out of them. They said that the family was basically damned and that demons would infest their children if they didn't start disciplining them. And Mary and James just accepted this. They believed Courtney when she said that Mary was possessed. They believed her when she said that demons were going to infest the children if they didn't intervene. So they gave them permission to start disciplining them and abusing them. James actually provided the belt and the spoon that was used to not only beat him, but beat his wife and his children. So James and Mary have 3 kids, and they're giving their next door neighbors permission to beat the devil out of them. And I mean, it's one thing to like believe that maybe they're being possessed or maybe that there's demons influencing the behavior or something. It's another thing to be like, yeah, no, let's beat the devil out of these small children. There's so many things wrong with that but basically Courtney and Ethan started making, you know, a couple trips a week, like almost daily, over to James and Mary's house to, you know, violently assault that family. In the probable cause report, and this is coming from James Mast, what he's telling police, he said that they would come over and turn off the security cameras. So James and Mary had some security cameras inside their house, like in the kitchen on top of cabinets. James said this was because of security purposes, because he was out of town a lot. But somehow, Courtney and Ethan had access to these cameras. So like, you know, these live stream cameras, you can access them right on their phone and check up on your house and see what's going on right from your phone. And somehow Courtney had access to their cameras that were in their house on her phone. And when they would come over, James said that Courtney would disable the cameras and turn them off so that there would be no record of the abuse. And I want to know how she got that password, because I have some of those security cameras in my home where we can access the video footage from a live stream on your phone, and you have to have a password and like a login to see that. So somebody must have given that to Courtney, probably James and Mary. They probably gave that to Courtney. And I wonder why they never changed the password or tried to change the settings so that she wouldn't be able to have access to it on her phone anymore. If they had changed the password, they would have been able to stop her from having control over those cameras. She wouldn't have been able to turn them off. But for multiple weeks, they let her come in, turn off their security cameras. They never changed the locks on their doors. It's not like they bolted the door shut or called the police and said like, hey, my neighbor's going a little crazy. She's coming in here and saying that we've got the devil in us and that she's gonna beat it out of us. She's trying to hit me, my wife, my kids. Nobody called the cops. Nobody tried to change the locks. There's really no evidence that James or Mary tried to do anything to stop Courtney and Ethan from coming over. And when they would come over and turn off the security cameras, initially this started out with like beatings with a spoon and a belt. And they didn't just beat the children, they beat James and Mary too. And James specifically said, you know, that the only real beating that he got was with a spoon, but that it was one of like the worst beatings of his life. And that they, you know, hit him on the bottom with this wooden spoon, and somehow that was enough to like control him. Like, I guess like that was so torturous that he was like then under their control. He surrendered. And I'm not saying that that wouldn't hurt, but he's a grown man. I don't understand how they overpowered him. Like, I get that Ethan was also a grown man and he could have helped overpower them, but I just have such a hard time being like, that's all it took for you to just like let them go and beat your kids. But even so, like once that beating was over and Courtney and Ethan left, why wouldn't he have called the cops? What, like, it's not like they were there 24/7. It's not like they had a constant watch on them. I mean, I guess they had access to the cameras in their home, but I don't understand what really stopped James from seeking help for his family. James would later tell police that it was because Courtney and Ethan threatened him. They said, you know, if you tell anybody or if you try to stop us, we'll just beat you or maybe we'll shoot you in the head. That's apparently what they said. So I guess this threat scared him into submission, and maybe that, you know, beating with a wooden spoon also kind of helped scare him into submission. But I just don't understand how he, you know, at no point in the next couple of weeks when he was seeing the bruises and the lacerations and the blisters on his wife and children, why he didn't seek help in some way, or why Mary didn't seek help in some way. It just seems so bizarre to me that they let this carry on for so long and that they also participated in the assaults against their children. Now, there's some mixed accounts of what exactly this assault looked like, and I don't want to get into too much details around it because the bottom line is they abused those kids. Now, different sources on the internet, like different articles that I've read, say that the 11-month-old baby, the youngest child in that house, was unharmed. But there's also some reports, specifically from the probable cause document, that that's not the case. So Courtney and Ethan and James and Mary all inflicted abuse on these kids. And Jessica and her younger brother, who was 2 years old, received the most of it, I guess. But they would just mercilessly beat these poor children. And the goal, I guess, of the beating was to get them to surrender, just like their father, I guess, they wanted them to stay still and to just accept what was happening to them. But these are small children and they don't even have any concept of what's going on with them, so they wouldn't be able to do that. It's very hard to think about. It's disgusting. But it wasn't just Courtney and Ethan that were doing this, that were beating them. They got the parents to do it as well. And I feel like it'd be like one thing, like, okay, like if you're gonna beat me, fine. I can't believe that they would let these people beat their children and then they would go along with it too. It's like It's, I mean, these weren't just spankings, like, and you know what, in some religious communities and in some households, like, that is a part of the culture and it's not okay, but like physical discipline in some really like strict Christian communities is accepted. And I don't, part of me like wonders if that like played into the dynamic at all of this. By the week before Christmas, Jessica was covered head to toe in bruises and blisters and lacerations, new and old. Courtney and Ethan, along with her parents, had made it a habit of beating her pretty much until her little body gave out. And they said that this was, you know, in the name of God. During these beatings, they would tell her that she needed to be completely still, that she wasn't allowed to like scream or move in any way. And of course, she's a 4-year-old, and anybody who's being, you know, beaten with a belt is going to like move and react to it, but they just wanted her to be completely submissive. And when she wouldn't, they would say, well, that's like, you know, the demons defying God, and they would just keep beating her. And by December 19th, things had gotten completely out of hand. There was no order in this house anymore. There was no safety blanket for Jessica or her siblings to fall back on. During some of the beatings, it was reported that Jessica and her brother both would, you know, reach out to their parents and cry to their parents and, you know, try to run to them, but they would either be stopped and restrained from going to their parents, or their parents would like run away from them. By James Mast's own account, he was running around a kitchen table trying to dodge his 4-year-old daughter, who was trying to run into his arms for safety. That's one of the most horrific details to me in this case, because I can't imagine running from any child that's reaching out to you, especially in pain, and then he's just like letting this happen. It's so disgusting. It just makes me, poor Jessica deserved better. I wish that somebody had been there to reach out and grab her and take her into their arms and shelter her, block her from these blows from these grown people. Jessica just had nowhere to turn to. And again, she's 4 years old, so even if she, you know, had the idea to run away or go somewhere, she wouldn't have been able to. This was an extremely remote area. By December 19th of 2020, Jessica and her brother were in bad shape. That morning, around 8 a.m., Courtney and Ethan made their way over to Jessica's house. James and Mary, the baby, Jessica and her brother were all eating breakfast when they walked into their kitchen. Jessica and her brother had an instant reaction when they walked into the room. Both of them no doubt knew that their presence meant a terrible beating was about to come their way. And just like she had done in the past, Courtney took out her phone to disable the kitchen security cameras. That morning, Courtney and Ethan went on to severely beat Jessica's 2-year-old brother. And instead of intervening to help, James Mast just went in his bedroom to go lay down because he didn't want to see what was going on. Apparently, Courtney and Ethan forbid him and Mary from assisting their child in any way. They weren't allowed to comfort them or wrap them in a blanket or tend to their wounds at all. This, they said, was a part of the discipline that was needed in order to rid them of these demons. And it's just disgusting that they would even call this discipline, because it's torture. And they left for a little while in the early afternoon, but they came back that evening. And that's when they started to beat Jessica. It's been reported that they beat Jessica severely. And at one point, Jessica reached for the hem of her mother's skirt and she actually latched on to her mom. But she was soon pulled away, only for the beating to continue. As a punishment for reaching out to her mom, and as a punishment for Mary for letting her daughter reach out to her, they made both of them strip and get into the pond. They told Mary to submerge her daughter in the freezing water, and Mary complied. She dunked her daughter in the water multiple times and then proceeded to leave her on the bank of the pond while she swam a lap as punishment. They then allowed Mary to take her daughter back inside, but they made her leave her on like the foot of the stairs, and then they left. Even after Courtney and Ethan left the house, they just left her on the stairs. Mary said that she texted them a couple of times and asked if she could tend to her own daughter, and they said no, so she didn't. She said she was afraid that if they found out that she'd helped her in any way, then the beatings would just get worse. So she left her daughter there to freeze. A few hours later, James came down from the bedroom and saw his daughter at the foot of the stairs, so he picked her up and put her in her bedroom. And he claimed that he wrapped her in a blanket and turned the heat up a couple of degrees because she felt really cold. And that is all the care he administered to his daughter, who was beaten from head to toe and probably suffering from hypothermia. At 1 a.m., James made a call to 911, finally. But he didn't tell the operator at first what had happened. It took him a while to, tell them that somebody is in his house dead and that somebody is his own daughter. It's unclear when exactly Jessica passed away, and we don't really know when they discovered that she was no longer alive. We just know that they called the cops at 1. And when the police arrived at the scene, they noted that James was actually kind of calm. They didn't really expect that from somebody who had just called in, about his daughter's death. He told them that his daughter's body was upstairs, and when the officers went into the room that he had pointed out to them, they found a pink blanket on the floor. They lifted back the blanket to see a small, pale, badly beaten little girl who was very clearly deceased. Police and EMTs on the scene noted that she was bruised and had blisters and lacerations from head to toe. There was a small pile of vomit right next to her, and it looked as if, somebody had gotten sick. Police immediately separated James and Mary and started questioning them about what the hell had happened. And James, pointed the finger at his next door neighbors. He told the officers that it was like a religious thing that they had all gotten caught up in, and that they had been coming over to discipline the family and beat the devil out of them. And the police, were like, what do you mean discipline? What do you mean beat the devil out of you? And James actually dropped his pants and showed him his, butt and was like, look, they hit me with a spoon. And the police and EMTs noticed that there were marks that were consistent, with maybe like the shape of a wooden spoon. But they still had a hard time understanding how this man could have really let this go on, because some of the stuff that he was telling them that he went along with, that he allowed to take place and that he participated in, was just so horrible and horrific that they couldn't understand how a father could have let this happen. And when they're questioning Mary, they couldn't really understand the same thing of the mother, She had a black eye when they arrived on the scene, and she said, it wasn't my husband, it was the next door neighbors. But still, they couldn't understand how this mother was letting this take place in her house. And her 2-year-old and her 11-month-old have signs of obvious abuse, and her 4-year-old daughter is dead in the other room, and she's not crying. She's saying that she understands if they have to take her kids away. So it was kind of odd behavior for both of them. Like, neither of them was hysterical or anything like that. They were both just like, it was our neighbors and they tricked us into it. I can't believe we fell for it. That was the stance they were taking. So police went next door to see what was up, and police arrested Courtney and Ethan. Mary and her 2 children were pretty badly beaten. They had obvious signs of abuse, and of course police needed to document this for the case and also, get them treatment. So they sent them off to a hospital, but they also called in Child Protective Services because they knew that, the parents had admitted to allowing this abuse to take place, and they knew that that was still just the very tip of the iceberg. So they had these kids put into protective custody right away, which is really good because there's been some other Missouri cases where that has not been the case. They've allowed families to stay together in some circumstances where you would just be very surprised. And thank God, because Courtney and Ethan were arrested after that 911 call. On December 20th, they were both charged with second-degree murder, among some other charges. But James and Mary wouldn't be arrested until a couple of days later on Christmas Eve. So there was a few days where those kids possibly could have still been in the parents' custody. And so I'm very thankful that that was not the case. So the Benton County Sheriff's Department has been investigating this case. And they've also released some statements addressing the spiritual aspect to this case. And they say that it's not a cult, that even though there was definitely a religious tone to this crime, they think it was an isolated incident between these two families. And I kind of agree with that, because I think that what happened here centered more around the dynamic between these two families, and maybe religious dynamics played a part in allowing this stuff to escalate. But I don't know if religion was really the main motivator, because Courtney Almond had a lot of reasons to be upset with James and Mary, and I think she took a lot of those feelings out on the kids as well. I definitely think she could have some religious delusions, considering she spent some time in a mental health ward, but we don't really know the full extent of her diagnosis, if there is one, or what that background is on that mental health, so I don't know if delusions are a part of that. It's possible that they are, but I think it's also very possible that she was upset with the way things turned out with James. She resented Mary for it and the children, and so she took it out on them in the worst way possible. And I think that, Ethan probably went along with it because he's sick. Maybe he believed to an extent that Courtney was a vessel of God and that she was doing his work by getting these demons out of the family. But I think it's also very possible that he was just really twisted and wanted the chance to partake in violence and in dominating another man and another family. So who knows? And I really hope that we find out more about that in trial. Ethan also could have been trying to, defend Courtney's honor in a weird way or support her. I don't know. I'd be very interested to know, though. I think probably James and Mary went along with it because they're also a little bit sick. I think that they probably have somewhat weak personalities. I think Mary kind of already has displayed this with how submissive she is and sort of passive with the decision making in her own household. There's the chance that they truly believed that beating their children this badly and beating each other this badly would rid them of their demonic energy. I don't know, maybe they really believed that, but there's also just the chance that they too were a bit sadistic. I wouldn't put it past them, considering everything that they went along with. And Mary has this history of being submissive, and I mean, at this point in this scenario, it became criminal just how submissive she was. They had so many chances to stop what was happening, and they continuously failed their children and allowed them to be abused. Not only allowed them, they participated in the abuse. So we don't know anything about Jessica's cause of death or really the full extent of what happened to her, other than the accounts that James has provided us from the probable cause statements. Her autopsy isn't available or completed yet. I'm not entirely sure, and I'm sure a lot of that stuff won't even come out until after the trial and stuff, because they do have to, keep a lot of that information close to the vest so as to preserve the integrity of the case. So a lot of stuff is still unknown to us, but the stuff that we do know is just absolutely crazy. What makes this case tricky, and what I fear could be used as a defense for these 4 murderers, is that this case involves a lot of reciprocal abuse. Courtney and Ethan beat the family. The parents were beaten, and they also participated in beatings. Courtney may have incited all of this, but everybody participated in it. He wasn't, but technically Courtney and Ethan, and I guess James and Mary, could claim that they weren't there when Jessica died. And that's still neglect and abuse, because it's their fault for what happened. They caused it, but their defense attorneys could maybe argue that they maybe indirectly caused it. And while that might not get them off the hook, it could, result in them getting a lighter sentence because they might not be able to prove, that it was first-degree murder, that they planned to kill these kids. And right now, Courtney and Ethan are being charged with second-degree murder. So that's probably right on the nose. They definitely deserve that. And Mary and James are being charged with first-degree child endangerment and domestic assault. But I honestly think that they should probably be charged with second-degree murder too, because even though Mary was victimized in some situations during this abuse period, on December 19th, she was the one that dunked her daughter in that pond. She brought her out there and did that. And we don't know if Jessica died from hypothermia, but I'm sure that definitely contributed to her death. I mean, it was below freezing that day. Ethan and Courtney might have been the ones that told her, you need to dunk your daughter in the freezing water, but Mary was the one who did it. She chose to do it, and she could have just, I don't know, in some cases, I think it's fair to say you never know what you would do until you find yourself in that person's shoes. But I feel like in this case, most of us, all of us should be able to agree that if somebody was telling us to do something that harmful or harmful at all to a child, I mean, I would let them do whatever they want to me, but I wouldn't let them make me do something like that to a child. And I have a real hard time believing that they were so coerced and so thoroughly manipulated by their next door neighbors that they just, turned on their kids. They obviously couldn't have loved their kids very much or cared very much for their kids if they just within a, 3-week period just decided to be like, okay, yeah, no, let's just start abusing them. And I wonder if there was any abuse in that household or neglect in that household before this whole demon possession thing started. Maybe we'll find out in the trials when some more information is revealed. Maybe for some people, they might look at this case and be like, it's a no-brainer, obviously, especially with all of the stuff that James and Mary have already told police. They've implicated themselves. You might think, how on earth could these people get off lightly? But these 4 people are all being tried in the 30th Circuit Court in Missouri, and this court has a history of letting people off the hook very lightly with a slap on the wrist after they've committed horrible acts against children. Even when proof is there's been some cases that would surprise you. So I think the main worry in this case is that all 4 of these defendants, they have some complex histories and histories of abuse and mental health stuff. So understandably, the community is worried that they might get off more lightly than they should. And in Missouri, if you get charged with second-degree murder, you could have a sentencing that's as low as 10 years in prison. There is a change.org petition that I will link below in the description of this video, and it outlines some of the concerns that the community has about this case going to trial, and it's really meant to just sort of bring awareness and put pressure on these public officials that will have a say in their sentencing and whatnot. And it's an issue that is bigger than all of us individually, and so it's going to take a lot of people on board to resolve and to make waves. And so signing the change.org petition is a great way to show your support and demand justice for Jessica. In the description box, I'm going to have some links to resources, charity groups, and different programs here that advocate for children. On March 2nd, James, Mary, and Courtney all had their bond hearings, and Mary was seen smiling in court after being told that she was being charged with first-degree child endangerment, domestic assault, and had a bond at $500,000 on her head. So I don't know what was so funny about any of that, but hopefully she gets the justice she deserves, and she won't be smiling when that happens, because prison isn't a fun place. There's not a lot of smiles in prison, especially for people who hurt children. So I don't think she's gonna be smiling for long. James was slapped with the same exact charges and the same bond that Mary got. And unfortunately, both of them were able to post it, and they're currently living with some family members in Missouri right now. So luckily they will have no contact with their other children. And Courtney was actually denied bond, so serves her right. I think the judge was pretty fair there. And Ethan Mast has yet to see his bond hearing, I guess because he was a little later than the others to secure a lawyer. That's about all I have to share with you guys on the case so far. It is ongoing, and we're gonna see 4 different trials by the end of all of this. So I will keep you posted. As soon as we have some more information, I'll make an update video. Jessica hopefully is in a better place, and her siblings now aren't left to suffer at the hands of people who were hurting them, people who were supposed to protect them and care for them. So please sign that change.org petition. Check out some of the other resources, share them, you know. And like I've said before, look out for the people around you, especially the children around you. If something just doesn't look right and you fear that there's a child being abused, contact your local authorities, say something, speak up, try to help that child. I wish somebody had been there to help Jessica, but we aren't going to forget her, and we are going to see this case through the end and demand justice for her. So thank you very much for sticking it out with me for another one of these videos. I know this one especially was hard to take in. It's just so insane, all the different elements to it, and anything that involves children just makes these cases so much harder. So I appreciate you guys being able to sit through this video with me. So thank you once again. This case has so many disturbing yet interesting elements, especially with the religious twist on it. So if you guys have any input, I would love to know what you think, because I'm not even really sure if I believe that they really believed that this was a demon, or if it was just an excuse to inflict violence and abuse on people. So I don't know, do you guys think that it was a shared delusion? Do you think that, you know, they really believed it? Maybe Courtney really believed it because she did have a history of some mental health stuff, but I don't know. I'm left, like, after I looked at this case, wondering like what actually happened here? Like how can they justify this? How can they explain this? And I'm hoping we'll find out more with, you know, the coming trials, but let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit the bell for notifications so that you'll be updated next time I post a video. Until then, stay safe, stay healthy, take care of each other, maybe subscribe to this channel, I don't know, but until then, goodbye you guys, I will see you next time.